Dragonspine, a place in Genshin Impact that most people would consider a pain to explore. However, I actually really like it. The snow-capped mountains are, for now, unique, and on top of that the new wars, monsters, forgotten ruins and caves, alongside ice mechanics create an unrivaled experience. If you're willing to go through with it, of course. That's a primary problem that I'm sure I'll encounter once I go to Enkanomiya. The optionality of it all. The Chasm doesn't technically have this problem unless you go to the extremes that is the optional archon quest, but it is an archon quest. I wouldn't consider it so. I'll be talking more on that alongside the environment, gameplay, characters, and I guess story. I'll probably also talk about what's to come with these things as the sheer cold was already reused for La Signora's boss fight, and I'm sure a lot of stuff will come back for Snezhnaya down the line, and possibly be reworked for Natlan. However, that's extra content for those who either really enjoy speculation, Dragonspine, or just my content in general. Let's get a move on, people. We gotta discuss this polarizing polar not so paradise, and explain why Dragonspine is a beautiful burden. Spoilers ahead, and like and subscribe if you enjoy, maybe even share.
Oh no, avalanche!
Look out!
This place is real painful to explore, at least according to the vast majority. Even ignoring the mechanics, the crazy heights and ascending peak is something that somewhat limits the player, as unlike anything else in the game ever, there's a main goal. Sure, the Chasm has a main goal, but it's far more open world and faithful to the game as a whole when compared to Dragonspine. There's stuff to explore, but just look at it. The Statue of the Seven is an objective rather than something to make you want to explore. You can't just leave a big gap in the map after all. Both the Chasm and Enkanomiya are fully separate layers with no statues, and while I don't know the mechanics of Enkanomiya, the Chasm treats it as a less important objective. To properly explore any of Dragonspine with the map involved requires that statue, and it affects the beauty of the overall map anyway. Does this count as me rambling on about the mechanics? I hope not. On top of this, Dragonspine has the unique principle of being designed as a very content-rich place in a small surface area as it was part of a whole content update. While nowadays we get 1 to 3 regions almost every other update or so, Dragonspine would have been quite a big deal. Besides those pesky mechanics I legally cannot mention yet, it's got a massive cavern along with many ruins to explore. It even has set entrances and exits alongside ways to get to those entrances and exits. The ascending spiral path to the top, or the many other things on the sides all prove a point. The point of the place not being super open. The caves have a lot of light coming straight from the chunks of ice as well as things that look like hearts and veins, giving a mix of red and blue depending on where you go. Variety is cool, and I'll be bringing variety up multiple times throughout this video as it helps the player imagine, something that a lot of this place aims to achieve it seems, though being limited or closed off doesn't mean it's small. The height focused terrain causes it to feel even larger as well as, tell me a flat place doesn't feel smaller and less interesting than a place with a lot of variety. A lot of Mondstadt towards the middle especially falls into this, and so does a chunk or two of Liyue. Dragonspine changes this up with its height, addition of underground environments and things I'll have to mention in the future. It's an anomaly amongst its nearby areas, and on top of that, Dragonspine is located effectively between Mondstadt and Liyue, which makes it even more difficult to consider it as a part of an existing region. Back to the less open world nature of it, just look at the overview map. A chunk of it is actually cliff rather than walkable lands of snow. It's just a bunch of paths that ascend toward the peak. This sense of layering and secrecy is both interesting, and to have red parts fill blue parts helps me personally appreciate the cool coloured locations even more and really emphasises the beauty I talked so highly of. I think striding in the snowstorm really represents that emphasis, but on the darker, more desperate parts of the place. Because of that content enrichment the designers attempted to do for this expansion, there is almost no purely empty areas within the place. This isn't helped by the enclosed nature of it, but overall it's just beautiful, but a burden to do. The constant feeding of places to find and areas to explore within Dragonspine is cool and not even close to overwhelming due to the way the paths guide you, but it's a chore to get up as well. Even the mist helps a lot for such an undeniably small place, it feels massive. The layered terrain helps, but the fog does as well. This is an effect every game can use for whatever place, but restricting the player's vision creates a sense of mystery which can bring out that player's imagination a bit, and while that's already good, it then takes it a step further and makes the player imagine a more spacious environment around them, hence why it feels so big. This contributes to a sense of progression shown frequently in Dragonspine, as memorizing parts of it without a map and extremely foggy surroundings is crazy. Also, the fossils and yellow trees are really cool. It makes it feel Mondstadtian, and the large fossils make it different to other games' renditions of snowy mountains to give it that fantasy feeling Genshin Impact is so well known for, right? Now, I rarely do this, but I want to discuss the soundtrack of Dragonspine, because I think it shows the parallel nature of it both being a chore but also being beautiful, and how both of these things can complement each other. The battle theme All-Conquering Tide gives me that burdened feeling with a taste of beauty that remains relevant to Dragonspine. It feels awfully peaceful, but also like I'm going against something bigger and somewhat foreign. A lot of instrumentation in this song isn't featured in other Dragonspine tracks, but a key part, the piano, which makes it have the peaceful undertone, is. These tracks are not only featuring Yu Peng Chen and Hoyo mixed like most existing Genshin tracks, but also a new person, Zach Huang, if I pronounced that right, who is exclusive to this series of tracks. It explains the focus on slow beauty as we listen to Snowberry Tales. It's slow, simple, and impactful. You simply cannot get something like this in Genshin Impact unless it's creepy, but Mondstadt's innocence purifies the track for me. Finale of the Snowstorm emphasizes progression for me, and even without the name, reminds me of the peak of the mountain. Finally, Moonlark's smile is the epitome of nostalgia and innocence, being a pure dose of beauty that completely foils any tediousness or pain from playing through Dragonspine, and reminds me a lot of Liyue, personally. A summary of all this is that it's truly beautiful due to the cool, slow and calm atmosphere, mystery creates curiosity and imagination due to the mists, and the unique ascend to the peak structure creates a both beautiful and unique experience that subverts the typically open world nature of Teyvat. It's also worth mentioning, this is blooper me here, not script, so I'm gonna stutter a lot, but I think Durin's backstory, the dragon, which I'll be explaining later, is very relevant to this soundtrack and the innocence and nostalgic parts of it. However, this stuff is child's play, as it really becomes a burden when we consider the main attraction of Dragonspine, a certain mechanic, sheer cold. Comment if you hate it or love it. Sheer cold is crazy. While I personally like it, it is an extreme thing that is very ballsy for a game that prides itself on being open world to do. Thankfully, it's in such an enclosed area, as we clarified previously. Sheer cold is a bar that slowly ascends till it climaxes and begins to damage the player over time. This to me actually helps the need for adventure and sense of progression, as you must light and find torches, lanterns, sealies, campfires and more. Even teleporters and stuff serve to warm you up, giving the player vibes of stuff like checkpoints and more. Exploring this place becomes more of an epic quest rather than a casual adventure because of both this, the restrictive terrain, and that fog I brought up. You become a lot more grateful for both things and can't carelessly explore when you need to worry about an ice bar the whole time, which then slows down your experience and makes it all feel both more like a burden and helps you appreciate your surroundings. That brings the beauty. Don't forget the fresh battles with insane Fatui agents, those warming sillies I brought up before, and some other miscellaneous stuff like ruin graders. I just think the difficulty of the enemies, also Frostarm Lavacho, makes that burden thing even more prominent. It spikes from the easiest nation in the game for God's sake, but on the contrary, easy stuff like using Crimson or stuffs to destroy the special ice or grabbing Crimson negates can be relatively simple things to do, which is somewhat beautiful in itself. The red really contrasts the icy atmosphere that should be desolate but isn't entirely for some reason. Though on the contrary, those gates can be very tedious to an extent since it's like a whole other ocular system. And even the Chasm does this with that Lumen Spar or Lumenstone ore, whatever it's called. I do think these Crimson ores and old ruins are why. It breathes fresh life into these icy cold peaks that wouldn't be there otherwise, and I can confidently call this place beautiful because of it, which makes a lot of sense considering once again Durin's story. Variety is already great, and these small things push that. Paired with the, of course, slow nature of the snow-covered mountain, it only helps us appreciate those small things. I've also got to mention those tedious stone tablets that are spread across the map. Personally, I haven't done them, and while I'm sure in the moment it isn't that bad, it definitely sounds like a bit of a burden to do. I don't see objectives like this very often, and if it weren't for guides, this would be a pain to activate all the tablets. I've only done like 4 and I'm already not bothered to finish the job, I'll be honest. The final objective to activate the domain at the peak is also quite irritating to do, but it isn't the worst, just a little time consuming. Despite that tedious irritation I get from it, I do like how the peak has one final objective before you can say you've truly finished the basis of Dragonspine. And I mean, as a child main, why wouldn't I want the Heart of Depth artifact set? Overall, it's pretty cool but somewhat tedious. Finally, the optionality that I briefly mentioned in the beginning of the video is a player here, as it definitely increases the burden thing by a landslide. If this was all mandatory, you could argue it might make it worse, but I think the fact it's optional means a lot of people can just find it lame and then dip, while if it was mandatory, more people would give Dragonspine a chance and realise it's beautiful deep down. There's also the cryo hyperstasis here, which I may as well mention. This is definitely shaping up to be a smaller video. I mean, it's just a small little expansion area. Recapping all of that, Dragonspine becomes a pretty big burden due to the separate gate system, occasionally annoying puzzles, as well as the peak puzzle, and primarily the sheer cold mechanic. It's beautiful due to some of these puzzles and the unique, albeit very difficult enemies. Let's move to the characters. Expect shorter sections from here on.
Fire? Fire! Warmth! Wait!
Watch out! Dragonspine was brought back to life!
This place has a backstory, but chronological things and lore don't have much to do with the topic of this video, that being why Dragonspine is a beautiful burden, at least right now. This will most likely just touch on the beauty of the place anyway. Albedo has an interesting artificial backstory in relation to Dragonspine's backstory, and really encapsulates the mysteriously beautiful nature of the environment. He captures the curiosity of us as players, as well as simply being cool and contributing to the world building. Something else that's cool and contributes to the building of the world around you as an individual is liking and subscribing. If you want to be extra cool, share. This shameless plug is true because the words liking and subscribing rhymed. Now do it. If you want to, of course. Moving on. In fact, that isn't it. Albedo is effectively Dragonspine. There's curiosity there. His element is geo, much like how Dragonspine is a mountain with even the first large cave in the game, alongside those piano tracks I mentioned earlier being similar to his calm personality. Would you consider Albedo beautiful? I certainly would, much like the area of Dragonspine itself. He clearly tries to avoid burdening himself, as he doesn't like wasting his food, and much like the isolated nature of Dragonspine, he isolates himself as well. Both seen through his jobs and his dislikes. If we bring back the food thing, that's what isn't accurate between the two, the burdening. He avoids it, but Dragonspine doesn't. That mystery can be a burden to pursue, and the mountain is a mystery. Or it's because Albedo and Durin are totally different. Wait, who's Durin? I've only mentioned him a little bit.
What is to be sung transpired in days of yore, when the divine archons still walked the earth. A dragon cast his curious gaze on the world below, as he parted from the heavens that gave his birth. The dragon sought truth amongst common folk, but mortal trifles only fogged his...
Durin, the dragon that the spine belongs to, is technically Albedo's brother, and on top of that, he was tainted with his creator's negative mindset and desires, causing Durin, once again, to not be fully conscious. He was a burden amongst the people of Mondstadt, but was beautiful and kind on the inside. While this is already ironic, his heart is literally still beating within the mountain itself. You could technically say Dragonspine is just Durin because of this. The fact Durin was also a beautiful burden only serves to justify further that Dragonspine is as well because of this. It also helps justify Albedo's thematic connection too due to their relations. I think this in itself is beautiful and honestly really awesome. Credit to Ichi for her video on Durin, and she's a small creator, so go check her out. I wouldn't have known these things if it weren't for her. I will admit though, I'm smaller. There's fun stuff like other characters hosting events up in Dragonspine as well, which builds the place up to be even more interesting while simultaneously helping players that don't enjoy the place to grow some form of liking for it. Dragonspine is pretty cool. Sucrose is a little annoying in my opinion, but she helps give some more depth to Albedo, which indirectly gives depth to Dragonspine as a whole. And the ancient civilization stuff does the same. Of course, this section isn't big. This is just characters that make the place more beautiful, to be fair. A basic recap is that Dragonspine's role as a beautiful burden makes sense considering both Durin and then Albedo's backstories and the relations between them, alongside that ancient civilization being the definition of hidden beauty being a chore to witness. Let's go to the unique section, being the future usage of these unique mechanics. Ever since the boss fight with La Signora, I've had a suspicion of future usage of Dragonspine mechanics. Common Alpha Signora. While the Crimson Tears, Crimson Gates, and Suspicious Ice are exclusive to the place due to Durin's involvement with the origin story, I can't say the same for Sheer Cold. The concept of cold or hot temperatures can't be exclusive, and I think the cold will be in parts of Snezhnaya, specifically parts though. The whole nation being freezing would drive the whole fanbase crazy, let's be for real. On top of that, the same mechanic was reskinned to be hot instead of cold for the same boss fight. I think this will be reused in Natlan, as on the leaked overview map of Teyvat, clear molten locations are shown. There are some other places that give these sorts of effects, such as parts of Inazuma giving the player Bale Thunder, which is an accumulation of electro damage over time. This could easily be repeated for both future nations in my opinion. Imagine an expansion of some form being a volcano within Natlan, or a city being inside a volcano, like the Daily Bugle from Fortnite. Imagine if there was a heat mechanic inside said volcano, or even in Fontaine. Imagine some magma crack in a water body somewhere, transitioning to Natlan that produce insane amounts of heat, boiling, and bubbles. Lots of bubbles. So, lots of mechanics, just look at Sumeru and the land parts of Fontaine. I'm quite literally cooking with these concepts. On top of that, it's not even guaranteed Natlan will be linked to Fontaine, but that's okay. I just think Fontaine might be like an alternate Dragonspine where instead of cold it's hot, and instead of ascending it's descending. Fontaine is linked to Mondstadt after all. I made a whole video on it a while ago. Just remember, both have no Harbinger boss fights, both have Harbingers that attack the Archons, and even the Archons are similar. If you want to consider Farina an Archon, we'll call it Lizard Leg or something like that instead of Dragonspine. Okay, the speculative part is over. That's an extra part for today's video, just thought it would be cool to talk about. Isn't exactly what the main video is about, but we can always have some fun, right? Let's finally talk about conclusions, people. You'll be falling asleep now. Get ready. But remember, I want someone to comment Lizard Leg because I really think that's a good name, and
Do you know the story of Durin and this mountain? Snow gathers atop this mountain and never melts, which is a most curious phenomenon. In fact, I believe that the very sword in your hand has Durin's remains in it. As such, who could I find to help me if not you?
A little anticlimactic, but here we are. Sorry for the possibly subpar quality, but talking about a single expansion is nothing short of difficult. Anyway, ignoring that, I think I got my message across. It's got less tracks than a lot of places in the game, much like Mondstadt as a whole, and lacks the biomes of places like the Chasm, so that causes it to be a bit of a burden to explore. But if you can appreciate what is here, it's nothing short of beautiful, at least to me. I don't usually say this, but this is only my opinion, and you're allowed to disagree. In fact, comment if you do. I want to hear it, or read it. Have a good day, and remember to like and subscribe, and as of a few hours ago, even join my membership program on YouTube. Just press that big join button anyway.
Was the two of us meeting really a good thing?